give that a read. I don't know, how old were you guys then? Do you guys remember this?
I wasn't born at the beginning.
What? What did you say?
I wasn't born sometime. Oh, that's why.
I was gonna say you were little maybe, but
You were one.
so yeah, okay. So what? If you guys are 20 something, so you were like 5 years old-ish, whatever, somewhere between.
I was 7.
So this issue was people were going kind of nuts.
I remember, yeah, people.
Yeah, because I was even just well, it was 15 years ago basically. So, but I was in the business world, and there was precautions, you know, just in case the whole world came to an end. And so this particular company was in this generator business.
I remember running to Randall's and there wasn't a single roll of toilet paper on the shelf.
Is that right?
Yeah, hoarding it, I guess.
Yeah. So if you were in this generator business, I mean, what would you be thinking? What do you think happens next, given the increase in demand? What are some of the things you might be thinking about as a business here? And kind of try to push yourself to think longer term.
After, you know, obviously wasn't going to happen with that, but
Okay, what's going to happen to demand if either A, nothing happens, or what might consumers have done? So what do you think is going to happen to demand then? Increase or decrease after 2000?
After, probably decrease.
Probably decrease, right? And so where do you think it would be relative to where it would have been on a normal year? So if we want to think about, let's just pretend demand's been pretty stable, or the increases in demand have been pretty stable over 1992, 1994, 1997. All right, so kind of imagine those normal years of where the demand curve is. In 2000, where do you think the demand curve would have shifted relative to a normal year? To shift back to is what I'm getting at. Is it going to shift back to normal or more flat? What do you think?
I think shift back to normal, I suppose.
Back to normal?
I can see that. I think after the theory of the computers not rolling over zeros, I think people would kind of settle back into their routine lives.
Okay.
I think sales and demand would adjust with it.
I'd agree with you that it would go back to normal probably eventually.
Yeah, right off the bat.
But what about like if we're looking at 1999, 2000, 2001, or whatever? What might consumers have done during that time frame that might cause demand to drop below its normal amount?
Resale.
Maybe that could be part of it. So they might have sold the ones that they.
Some the ones they didn't need on.
Yeah, maybe they bought a couple of them, so that'd be one. That's a good point. That's a possibility. What else did consumers do? If you were thinking, someday we should get one of those generators, do you buy it in 1999 or do you buy it in 2000? Assuming you're buying into some of the hype and the fear.
Oh,
You buy it in 99. So what did they do with their purchases over time? What kind of substitution went on? If they're thinking the average consumer, again back to 1992, we should get one of those generators one of these days. What did a lot of the consumers effectively do?
They waited until 99 to get it.
They got it in 99, and they might have been wanting to buy it in 2000, 2001, or they might not have cared, but they accelerated their purchase. Therefore, when we come to 2000, the normal people who would have been there in 2000, 2001 accelerated their purchase to 1999. And so it wasn't there, and so the demand dropped even more, right? So we got to kind of start thinking about implications of the consumer's behavior, and I liked your comment, by the way, on the resale. I hadn't heard that. That's probably worth an extra credit point, actually. Because you're right. There, some consumers might have wanted to buy 2 or 3 generators, and they don't really need that normally, so they might dump them on eBay, even though eBay didn't exist back then. Well, maybe it did exist roughly then. I can't remember.
Was Craigslist around? Probably not.
Craigslist? No, I'm pretty sure Craigslist was not there. So yeah, they might have bought a couple of them, so all of a sudden now you're competing with somebody who wants a generator. They're going to buy a used one from Fred, who bought 2 or 3 because he was one of those live in a bomb shelter people during 1999 and have all the dry goods and stuff set up. Okay, so there's a lot of things to think about. This is an example, kind of an extreme shock, but we've seen other shocks that happen in the market. You know, we get to hurricane or Katrina, natural disasters, that sort of thing. All right, so here's the 3 things that the author points out that you should be thinking about. The timing of the market. So in this case it was annual, but it might be if we're looking at pizza, maybe it's more monthly or weekly, or you know, something is seasonal, maybe it's quarterly or it goes through the seasons. So time, the product, and the market, the geography of the market. In this case was the United States. Geography might be a little too strict of a word now in today's online world. Maybe it'd be something that doesn't have exact physical boundaries. Okay, so this is some review of what we did. If you guys just give this a quick read. I mean, it's what I already spent time on. What's that? Yeah. So the one distinction he makes here that kind of adds to what we did earlier is this uncontrollable versus controllable factor, right? So notice that these things are the things that we had on the demand curve that were outside of our control, external factors, income of the population. We don't have control on that. Ottawa's median income is what it is, right? Weather, interest rates, prices, substitutes, complementary products, blah, blah, blah. Now down here, we get into things that we might have control over. In perfect competition, that doesn't matter because we got a homogeneous product. So those things really kick in when we have a differentiated product. Look at the things that are on here. Price, advertising, we got a little bit of wiggle room in price, warranties, adding other things on to complement the product, quality, like you guys mentioned with shampoo and other things, distribution, service quality. So now we're kind of bundling the product together. And then finally, the prices of substitutes and products also owned by the company. This is one we'll spend more time on later. But those are things that we can control. And this is how companies have a little more power on wiggling a product that they think better serves the consumer, right? So these are internal factors, and the other are external. Comments there at all? This is a kind of subtle, but hopefully will tie in. This is titled Shifts in the Demand Curve. So the company here, by differentiating their product, can make it more appealing, almost creating their own monopoly, kind of mini monopoly. It's not really a monopoly because a monopoly is just a single seller, but if you do enough gyrations with your product, through advertising, quality differences, blah, blah, blah. All of these monopolistically competitive firms kind of have a monopoly in their particular product, right? The main difference is that unlike monopoly, there's lots of close substitutes. The McDonald's hamburger, the Burger King hamburger, the Wendy's hamburger, right? So there's lots. So that's the key thing that's driving the fact that they don't have a lot of pricing power and that their demand curve is going to be a little more elastic. Okay, but we can kind of think of them being able to shift their own demand curve through being a little more creative. Okay, here's Microsoft details. Give this a read. So Bill Gates made a kind of a big decision that differentiated himself from Jobs. And that was to allow other people to manufacture it. That was his big move that was bold and away from what Apple did. So remember, Apple kept all of this stuff to themselves, the production. Now, who has troubles with viruses more? Microsoft, right? So that was one of the risk-reward trade-offs. So Apple always kind of had maybe a little bit of a quality or perceived quality edge in that regard, anyway, right? What really made Microsoft take off, though, was its business compatibility and being able to provide that at a lower cost to businesses, and that's what really made Microsoft jump outside of Apple, because Apple was always the consumer product more, and Microsoft quickly developed into the business use. And then I think what also worked well for Microsoft is that because people were using it at their place of business, then they already had kind of a little bit of a bias of buying that for their home once the home computer came about, because they were on these different operating systems. Now they're almost similar. I mean, they're really close, except with some, Apple probably still outperforms on some of the movie making and editing and artsy-fartsy stuff. But even then, new software is developed that makes them pretty close substitutes. Okay, so those are some ways. Comments on this one at all? What's that?
Oh, no.
All right, law of supply. We covered this. I'm going to zip through some of this stuff here. Okay, so this is actually, I don't think this is from your textbook, because I think this is my language. This is the definition I like to use. It's very similar to different types of equilibrium, but in its general form, where these two lines cross gave us an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity of whatever it is. And so a lot of times we'll denote that with a Q star and a P star as kind of common notation. And in general, I like to think of equilibrium as a situation in which there's no tendency for change. You're kind of like, right? Like if I didn't have to, you sit down on that couch after a long day and you kind of reach maybe an equilibrium. Now eventually, your muscles get sore after even an hour of sitting on the couch, or you need to move around or whatever. So there's a tendency to change due to muscle fatigue even, or mentally you're starting to think about the day again and what you need to do tomorrow. And so equilibrium, a situation in which there's no tendency for change. From our model with the supply and demand curve, this means that holding all other things constant, things like what? Bingo, bango, bongo. And holding all other things constant, this supply curve, things like what? Bingo, bango, bongo. So holding the rest of the world constant, where would we expect this market to gravitate to? And the answer is $5. That's our equilibrium price. We can justify why by looking at the individual behavior that would occur if we weren't at that price. So if we were at a price of, let me come to the video, I guess, over here. If we were at a price of $8, the quantity supplied would be greater than the quantity demanded, right? What would we call that? There's kind of an econ term. What's that?
Supplier surplus.
Surplus, right. So a supplier surplus, in general, just a surplus. So we have this, sometimes we call it excess supply. In other words, at $8, if you're running a business, you've got excess inventory on the shelves. You're like, oh crap, I thought we were going to sell a bunch of units today at 8, and we have a whole bunch of beer left on the shelf. So my wife has been trying to find this root beer. Have you guys tried this? There's a beer, we tried it in Colorado. It's called, I shouldn't even tell you this because there's an extreme shortage that I'll get to here in a second going on. But it's a beer that really tastes close to root beer. And but it's a normal beer, but just the way they brew it or something. And so the last couple of weeks we've been going to the liquor stores, and if they get it on a Thursday, they've been out in a couple hours. And so when I just went to the store last night because my wife's been wanting this, and they said, you got to get it early in the week or whatever. And I said, so do you got any of that root beer? And she laughed. Not at me, but she just laughed at the situation. And I just immediately said, so you've been getting a lot of people asking for this beer, huh? And she's like, yeah, you're the third person today already, and we got it in on Thursday. I was just there yesterday, which is not yesterday, this must have been Saturday, because they're closed on Sunday. So Saturday, and she said, we got it in on Thursday, and 2 hours we were out. And so that's just the opposite of what's going on here. As an economist, what would I suggest that Blue Sky Liquor do? Get more supply would be one good idea, but a lot of times what happens is this stuff's in limited supply when the demand is hot for it, they can't get it. Jack up the price. They do have control over that, right? So if they are constrained on the quantity they can order in, put an extra $1, an extra $2. I don't know. Apparently, I don't even know what they have it priced at, but if it's at $8.99 and they're selling out in 2 hours, do you think they could put $11.99 on it? I bet they could. I bet I'd pay it, because then my wife would be happy when I brought it home, right? It's a little too sweet for me, but so raise your price. So that is how the pricing conveys information to the marketplace, both the consumers and the producers. The pricing system is just one of the most spectacular things that you guys probably totally take for granted. It's just amazing how much information the pricing system sends people day in and day out, second after second, minute after minute, day after day, week after week. We've got this whole matrix of prices that in a free market system, in a capitalist free market system, where prices are allowed to freely adjust because there's no government interference in them, that is immediately helping to move resources into their most valued place. And the book talks about this early on in the chapters, right? So the pricing system is going to help do that. And so here we see it happening is that if the liquor store has a price of $8 on some other beer, Natty Light, which is another favorite of mine, by the way, but if there's an excess supply on Natty, what should they do the next day to get rid of the Natty? Lower the price, right? So at that price, it sent a signal. That signal was excess inventory, or as David said correctly, a surplus of goods, an excess supply, and so they move that price down. If they move the price down too far to $3, now we have, what's this distance here where the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. So now at $3, the quantity demanded is here, the quantity supplied is here. What do we call that? I'm using this horizontal distance because that actually reflects an exact quantity where the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. It begins with an S. We got the surplus up here. We have more people wanting to buy. This is the root beer example. A shortage, yes. We have a shortage of root beer here in Ottawa right now. I am witnessing a shortage. I just made you guys realize a desperate need here in Ottawa, a shortage of root beer. And so again, that should signal to the stores that they have the opportunity to raise price. Now, is that fair? So some people, the lucky ones who got it last Thursday at within the first couple hours, you know, the store had it, let's say, at $8.99 for a 6-pack of this stuff. Are they mad? I mean, is this a bad thing? Is it just the liquor stores taking advantage of the market, and those doggone capitalists are so evil, they're always just making profits? Did they help society or did they hurt society by raising price? Did they help social well-being, you know, or was it better under this situation of a shortage?
No, I think they helped society because they were both willing, faithful.
Okay, good. So the voluntary aspect of it is super, super important, right? No coercion. Nobody was forced to do a deal. And so by raising the price up to, let's just say $5, or if the root beer goes up to $11.99, and now they seem to maintain their stock throughout the week at $11.99, but they are able to just sell about the amount they expected to at the end, right? How was society made better off? Well, they made extra money, but also no Russes went into the store and were ticked off at the store because they didn't get it, right? The lucky people who were able to buy it at the too low a price, sure, they got a deal. But society was better served by having that pricing mechanism in terms of the big picture again. So now this is where we go outside of kind of the individual interest, and we think, as a world, as a little island here, we talked about Tom and Jen on the island, are we correctly allocating scarce resources of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship? Are we correctly allocating those scarce resources to the best place? Some to pizza, some to chicken wings, some to root beer. I mean, are those resources being allocated correctly? The pricing mechanism allows that to be done. And that the costs involved with pizza production or root beer production are reflecting the scarcity of resources on our island and directing them to the right spot. And as the price comes up, then potentially less people are being harmed. We've got more root beer being sold, by the way, right? So we're now taking resources from other beers that aren't as good as sellers, and the root beer, maybe this particular, it's somewhere out of Colorado, because that's why we stumbled into it. That particular brewer is getting the right signal to say, hey, quit brewing that other IPA that we've been doing and ramp up the, this vat was scheduled to have the IPA in it. Let's put the root beer in the vat, right? And so now we're better serving society through that pricing signal, seeing that prices are going up and that there was shortages involved, that we're now reallocating resources towards the production of this root beer rather than the IPAs or something else. See how that pricing mechanism is guiding us through? It's what Adam Smith called the invisible hand of the marketplace. It's not any one individual, it's not a central planner, it's not President Obama that's directing prices. Hey, you should charge this much, you should charge this is how we should do it. But rather it's the invisible hand of many consumers and many producers guiding the market to this price of $5. Now, in a dynamic sense, do we ever get to equilibrium? Well, it depends on the context we're looking at. In the overall beer market, demand situations are changing, supply is changing, and so mainstream economists sometimes tend to put too much focus on solving for equilibrium. Oh, it's easy. The solution to society's problem is that this little math problem comes out with, we have an equation for this, we solve for 5, boom, set the price for 5. But in reality, there's a lot of uncertainty that kind of has this equilibrating process is kind of the language that we use, that we're moving towards that. This kind of gives us, again, a theoretical direction of where we're heading, but there's always maybe this churning of new businesses, new products, new warranties added onto a product. So there's this dynamic thing that's always evolving and changing. And if we let those prices do their thing, then we're conveying the information about scarcity of resources on our island effectively in the market system. Okay, so sorry, that was a bit of a pulpit there, but that's just so much fun stuff. Questions, comments on that? All right. So, schedule goggles. You guys will see maybe some problems like this just to get kind of comfortable. We have equations that underlie this as we talked about before. Where the two lines cross, $8. Notice on the schedule here, quantity demanded of 5, quantity supplied of 5, so the equilibrium is at 8, where those two equal each other. All right, let's do this little generator thing here. This is kind of interesting. So stable industry sales, 1999 is coming up. The industry ramps up production. And here is what really happened in the market. So they actually pulled this. They created these demand and supply curves just to reflect what the real world did. So anticipated demand, supply increase, so that's a shift to the right here. It's kind of not obvious. In fact, the way the textbook does, this looks like a shift down, doesn't it? Right? But it's just an optical illusion. If I bring out if I do this to this little dashed line and I go, right? It's a shift to the right. And I always teach my students to think of it being a shift to the right at different prices. So at this price, I used to supply this much, now we're supplying this much, because it's really the price that's driving that result. But it's not too uncommon to see textbooks kind of just show it to the right, but here making it appear as if it kind of shifted down, but it really has increased and shift to the right. That was not sustainable, so we had sales fall back afterwards. Okay, so price of computers. What do you think? Are they going up or down?
Both.
Both?
Yes.
What's your both answer? So that means it depends. Depends on what?
It's a very common part of our culture, so there's a very high demand for it. So there's a large amount of competitors and alternate resources to find ways to get online, whether it's a Lenovo cheap or a Mac.
Okay, so what you're bringing up, we might, it depends on the type of computer we're looking at, right? Are we talking about a desktop? We're talking about a laptop? Are we lumping desktops and laptops into the same category? And then we're looking at the innovation of iPads, which let's not call that the computer in the same fashion, right? So you're absolutely right. It depends on how we define the good. So for a desktop with similar specs, what's happened over the last decade to those? Have those prices gone up or down? Down, right? So the technology tends to increase. That's not even quite a fair question because we can't even look at two computers that are similar in quality. That's kind of the whole point, that the technology increases. So we've got either demand staying the same, or I think more likely what you said is that the increase in supply has outpaced the increase in demand, right? So if I show the demand increasing to here, notice we still go from here to here. And so it's the interaction of a couple things going on. There might have been increases in demand, but the large increase in supply due to technology and other things has led to lower prices overall. All right, so these are just kind of basics, ways of thinking about supply and demand. I'm going to skip this example. You can read it, you'll read about this in your text anyway. And I think I'll pass on this too. I will give you a comment, just so that as you read it, this is, like in the stock market, there's a dealer in between the buyer and the seller. And so this example brings you through what they call market making. And so a dealer will buy a stock at one price and then resell it at a higher price, which is called the margin, or the difference in between the bid price and the ask price. And so that they just kind of work through a simple little exercise, and you'll see this in here. But the reason I wanted to just at least note it here is that if we have dealers in the middle, then we might be looking at something slightly different than just a consumer and a seller coming together on their own, and how that price might differ if we have a dealer in the middle. Now, an interesting thing that I just learned at this conference in Vegas that I went to that I had not heard before, and I actually missed the session where he got into more details, but it was the owner of, Yahoo, or one of the former owners of it, or I can't remember, one of the tech guys who's been supportive of Bitcoin. Have you guys, have any of you actually used Bitcoin? I'm just curious if you've used it. You know what it is? It's computer money, more or less. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's at the end of the day, after I've analyzed it, I was skeptical of it before, but it's computer money that is generated by a formula that generates a specific number, and that is the quantity of money. So the quantity of money in the system is generated by this computer algorithm, and so you hear about people mining for Bitcoins. They're actually solving a sophisticated computer problem to get another dollar, and so they're mining it. But once this Bitcoin is in the system, so let me just give you an example. 4,654. 4,654 is one Bitcoin. That's $1, if you will, that's out there in the system. And then there's a whole bunch of other numbers too. And so how they keep track of the dollars, that's outside of the Federal Reserve, by the way, so outside of our own currency. It's like this tradable currency. So if, just like dollars work, if Peyton wants to sell something to Randy, and Randy's willing to accept a Bitcoin because Randy knows that she can buy something with the Bitcoin, right? So your ability to use the currency is part of what supports the value. And so you accept Bitcoin 4,654, and how they keep track of the money is that the transaction is always memorialized on a program, so to speak, each line item. And so we know that Bitcoin 4,654 was transacted between Peyton and Randy, and now Randy's holding on to the Bitcoin. So there's no way for you to falsify you selling your Bitcoin to Jason later to buy something from Jason. So then you'll do another transaction, and so the full history of it is always maintained, and that's how these Bitcoins are used as currency. And so it might, it's still making progress. In fact, there's some other of these computer currencies that have come up that could possibly reform issues that we have with our currency, namely that the Federal Reserve has discretion on how much currency they use. They can, again, this is far from a macro class, so they can play funny games with the central government that if they want to buy more weapons of mass destruction or increase government spending, they can sell government bonds, and the system can kind of be manipulated. This strips currency completely out of the central government. This is a completely private-run currency. And what we hang our hat on, I say we, I've never even used Bitcoin, but what the people hang their hat on is that they've come up with a bomb-proof way to track the thing, so it can't be, in fact, there's no paper currency at all. It's all a computer program. And so the amount of Bitcoins that you own is yours and mapped. So I bring all that up. A quick question then.
Yeah, how do they handle the exchange rate? Like, did you? Like,
it's just one currency, Bitcoin.
Oh.
Yeah. Now you can possibly buy Bitcoins for dollars. You know, if Randy said, hey, I've got 36 Bitcoins, I know that there's some purchasing power, but I'll sell them to you for $50 or whatever. So their own exchange rate would could be negotiable on a case-by-case basis. But there's certainly no exchange rate that's published by the Wall Street Journal similar to yen versus dollars or anything.
Yeah, that's great.
But the more people that start to accept Bitcoins as a means of payment, then the more viable that currency becomes. By the way, the Federal Reserve outlaws, they have a monopoly on currency, on coin. If you make your own coin and try to do this, you get thrown in jail. There's been cases of that. So the government has a monopoly on that, but Bitcoin is outside of that. There's no way to, it's outside of the law of the context of it being a currency that's competing with the national currency. So, all right, so I had to, especially I was surprised that you guys really didn't know much about Bitcoin. I mean, it's been around now for 4 years or more. It's probably longer when it was first developed, but it's been starting to become accepted in different places, especially in the online world. All right. The thing that was new at the conference was that they might start having a similar private mechanism to transfer stock assets and other things from a peer-to-peer. You guys have heard of Airbnb. You've heard of Uber. Come on, people, you heard of Uber, I hope, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what's Uber?
It's a taxi service.
Kind of, but how is it different from a traditional taxi?
Because they do anything, and they have a black car service. There's random people that
You're not hitting the thing that makes it really different from what's that? They come and pick you up. Who picks you up? How is Uber different from a regular old taxi service? Because what you're saying is all kind of similar to the way a taxi works. I call up the taxi company, I say, hey, I need a ride. I'm at 205 East 13th Street, come and pick me up. They say, we'll be there in 20 minutes. Who's doing the driving with the Uber? Regular old people.
Yeah, the other one's a federal employee. Or
Not necessarily
government.
a business employee, but it's also many times sanctioned by the government. They're licensed, so taxi drivers are licensed. So what Uber has done is really rocked things by making this a peer-to-peer exchange. So Uber is more or less a software program that has a number of registered drivers that have gotten kind of the blessing from their business to be a registered Uber driver. Their car meets certain safety specifications. Nothing big, but I mean just the normal things you'd expect in a car to be relatively safe. So they pull up and so they registered. Somebody says, hey, somebody in Ottawa needs a ride. I'm a registered driver with Uber. A little text message alert plops up and I'm like, oh, okay, somebody at 205 East 13th Street needs a ride. They need to go from, the person on the other end, by the way, has said, I need to go from Ottawa up to Lawrence. And so they say, oh, I'll do that for 20 bucks. Shoot them back a text message, and this is all done through the Uber system, that I'll give you a ride up to Lawrence for 20 bucks. Now that Uber driver goes up to Lawrence, he's logged in on the system. Potentially there's other people in Lawrence that either maybe want to come down to Ottawa, or maybe he'll get a couple other rides up in Lawrence back and forth before he comes back to Ottawa. So it's the way a taxi functions, but the technology has allowed us to go peer-to-peer, consumer to producer, direct, without having a middleman or the government involved, potentially. Awesome for small startup business. Now, Kansas City recently booted Uber out. Was kind of a big controversy. Why? Because the taxi companies are in bed with the politicians and make up stuff like, oh, Uber's dangerous.